Women in Power Active, a podcast started to empower women to find their own active adventure. I'm your host, Jacalyn Gross. Today's guest is Lynn Barlow, a mental performance coach helping athletes strengthen the one muscle we often overlook, the mind. Through her work with Mindfullsend, Lynn helps athletes navigate fear, build confidence, and show up fully when it matters most. Because the biggest summit isn't the mountain in front of you, it's the one within you. With a background in outdoor sports and high-risk environments, she understands what it feels like to stand at the edge, where fear and possibility meet, and helps athletes learn how to move forward anyway. And today, we not only get to learn from Lynn, but we also get to know the person behind the mindset work, her journey, and what led her to help others at their best. Performance isn't just physical, it's mental. And when your mindset is trained, everything else follows. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive in. I talked a lot about what you do for work, but we're going to start with you first. Give us your background. How did you become an active person?
Yeah, so I didn't really grow up playing sports. I was super active as a kid, but not really in any kind of organized way. I just ran around with the neighbor kids, climbing all of the trees and all of the neighbors' yards and, playing a lot of tag and riding bikes and stuff like that. And then after high school, I got super lucky and I was able to take a NOLS course and got to go whitewater kayaking essentially for the first time. And I was like, oh, like this is it. There was something about kayaking that just kind of hooked my interest.
Mhm.
So in college, started working as a raft guide so I could get more into kayaking. Started teaching skiing when I was in college also. So I basically spent the last 13 years teaching skiing in the winter and then doing some kind of activity on the water, raft guiding, teaching kayaking, leading flat water tours for, older folks. And so it's just been a cool journey, but definitely not a traditional sports experience by any means.
What like really hooked you?
Uh, I don't know honestly what it was about kayaking that hooked me. I think I liked the independence of it because it's just you in your boat. You're not having to rely on another person. It's just you. And so I'm from New Mexico originally,
Mhm.
which is a very dry state, but I was always obsessed with water as a kid. Anytime I was around any body of water, if it was like 40 degrees and raining, I was still probably going to go jump in the lake. I was just obsessed. And so I think with kayaking, I was like, oh, I can, be independent in this craft. And also, I just loved getting splashed in the face. It was like
Mhm.
17 and just so excited about it. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like I can get wet. I can do something that's independent, that's hard. And I think, yeah, part of the thing that initially drew me to kayaking also was that it is a hard sport. You fall over a lot more than you do when you're rafting, and then you have to, ideally roll yourself back upright and keep going. Like you could crash in the middle of a rapid and still have to right yourself and finish the rest of it, which is challenging.
Yeah, that sounds insane. I mean, it sounds like super fun, but also like, yeah, super technical. Have to be like ready and aware and, know what to do at all times. So once you started doing kayaking, did you look for other sports that were like that were like kind of extreme?
Yes and no. I think particularly when I first started kayaking and when I first started teaching skiing, I was really interested in doing things that were kind of at the upper limit of my skill set. But a lot of other extreme sports that most people have tried, like skydiving or bungee jumping, scuba diving, surfing. Like I haven't had the opportunity to do any of those because I've been pretty focused on the kayaking and the skiing, and I
Mhm.
haven't really had this space in my life to explore other sports. I think if I were to try a different extreme sport. Skydiving is really interesting to me. Free diving is another sport that's interesting to me. So we'll see we'll
Yeah.
see where my journey leads me, you know?
Yep. Exactly. What kind of skiing are you into?
Yeah, so I downhill ski, teaching skiing. So I taught at Big Sky for 8 seasons, and Big Sky is a really cool resort in Montana that has a lot more challenging terrain than most other resorts do. They have, special access terrain where you have to sign out with ski patrol before you go ski, and they only let certain number of people ski the line at a particular time. There's a lot of hike to terrain there as well. So again, I think, as I continue to progress through life, I'm definitely super interested in backcountry skiing,
Mhm.
but I've been primarily teaching and working and personal skiing at Big Sky, which has been a really, really cool, valuable experience. I'm Guide 3, which means that I have the highest level of guide certification. So if somebody shows up and they want to go ski all the special access terrain and go for a hike and ski the hike to terrain, that means that I'm qualified to evaluate whether or not that person actually has the skills to be there. And then if I think they're a good fit, then I can, take that person to ski the big couloir or hike out to first fork or something like that.
So that's super exciting. I wonder, so like going from teaching skiing, did you kind of how did you get to like psychology and being able to teach athletes like mindset training, and how did you get into that?
So as an athlete and as a human being, I am pretty high in perfectionism. So like my best is never good enough, basically. And I'm also pretty reactive to making mistakes. Like if I do something that feels like a mistake, I tend to be very kind of intense about it, a lot of sort of negative emotions around that. So there was a summer where I was kayaking quite a bit, and I was pretty dissatisfied with how I was kayaking. Like I wasn't ever meeting my standards. I would go out and have a pretty good lap, and I would make one mistake, and that mistake would kind of ruin the lap for me. And it got to the point where I was like, either something has to change or I'm going to have to quit kayaking. So I was just like Googling around, found a mental performance coach, worked with that person, as an athlete, and got a lot out of that experience. But it was also kind of an interesting sort of tension because the mental performance coach that I was working with had a very mainstream sports athletic background. Like mostly worked with like soccer players and tennis players and stuff like that. And so I would have occasionally these questions about the extreme sports experience of, well, like I'm feeling afraid because there's real risk in my environment. How do I navigate that? And I wasn't necessarily getting the answers that I was hoping for around that. So then I discovered that mental performance coaching is a thing. And I was like, oh, like as an extreme athlete, there's a real deficit in the field of mental performance coaches that specialize in the extreme sport experience. So I started thinking about how much longer I was really interested in doing seasonal jobs because they can be very tough on the body. Sometimes you have to be moving around a lot. Like I would be in Montana working, and then I would be, in Washington in the summer, and then back to Montana, and then sometimes to North Carolina. And I was like, all right, I think I'm ready to sort of settle down and focus. So that's when I applied to a master's program. I have a master's degree in applied sports psychology from Adams State. And yeah, I think it's been I think really valuable for me to have been on both sides of the experience, both as an athlete and then now as a mental performance coach.
Yeah, so I had a question too. What when you were kayaking before and like you were kind of beating yourself up, were you in competing? And I have, don't know that much about kayaking, but were you in some sort of competition, or was it just yourself?
Just myself. Yeah, whitewater kayak racing. So there's slalom, which is what you see in the Olympics. And then a couple times a year, there are some bigger whitewater kayak races, but it's not really a sport that has like a competitive, like a really strong competitive element. It's more just, again, right, with the perfectionism, like having
Mhm.
super high standards for myself, wanting to progress as an athlete. And then I would, like flip over in a rapid and it would be like the sky was falling. And I was like, all right, this is not.
Yeah. You're just like not making it enjoyable for yourself at that moment. I totally get that perfectionism. I have had I ran in college and I got to the point where I wanted to be like perfect because like when I PR'd everything was like perfect and I had done everything I should, but I was kind of running into a position where I was doing everything that I should and not doing well, not PRing. And I, and this is kind of like why I know that sports psychology is truly a thing, is because like when we were doing our last workout and I had done it with the team and I didn't have any races. I was just working out with the team at that point because I was done with my collegiate career and everybody was saying like how hard the workout was and I was like that workout wasn't that hard at all. Like I didn't feel, and then I realized that I didn't have all of that like pressure on myself anymore, that I was just free from that. And it's really truly a thing of like understanding like what the psychology of competing and being able to, that perfectionism aspect of competing, like letting that go and really being able to like release yourself from all of the pressure that comes along with like performance. And that's not even like a situation like you were talking about where you're saying okay there's that element, but then there's also an element of absolute danger that things could go wrong and you do have to perform at a high level and being able to like mentally deal with it. So like I guess when you're working with athletes to kind of overcome that, what are some things that you talk about with them if they are like scared of getting actually injured while competing?
Yeah, I think so. I think generally a lot of athletes can really struggle with their own, expectations for their performance.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be kind of like distracting from focusing on what needs to happen to be successful in the moment. And I think my first thought about athletes who are performing in high risk environments is that risk management is a super personal decision. And so, like my risk tolerance is not the same as, another athlete's risk tolerance. So I'm not in the business of telling athletes what choices they should or should not make in their sport. And I think another thing with that too is a lot of it can vary day to day. So I think about, for athletes that are in situations where there's real risk is what their focus is like on that particular day, right? Because being able to perform in a situation where the consequences are high, a lot of being able to be successful in that environment is kind of flipping a switch in your mind and putting your focus on where it needs to be for success, which is an external present moment focus on your line or whatever you need to be doing to execute. And so that's what you should think about. What you should not think about is stuff like, geez, if I mess this up, it's going to be really terrible. So like there's this, on the one hand, right, fear is our body's way of giving us information about the situation that we're in, right? Fear is saying there is real danger here, there is real risk, but there's a tools and techniques to be able to accept the fear and not get sort of wrapped up in the story that the fear is telling you and being able to be like, all right, so I'm in a situation with real danger and real risk, but I'm choosing to put my attention on an external present moment focus because that's what's going to help me be successful in the moment. I do think that, again, right, risk management is so personal, and it's not the case that you should always 100% of the time ignore your fear, right?
Mhm.
Fear is giving you information, particularly about how equipped you are to respond to a particular challenge. So if your fear is kind of like over threshold, then it's a good time to reevaluate your decision making, make a different choice, walk away, come back the next day with a different mindset, more rest, more preparation for that experience. And so I think mental training in particular can really help build the focusing skills that can help athletes sort of shift from this is the story that my mind is telling me about the fear that I'm experiencing. And I also think that mental training can really help athletes learn where their fear threshold is, and then also kind of increase their capacity for experiencing unpleasant emotional states and still being able to flip the switch and focus on what actually matters for performance.
Yeah, I love that threshold. That's so helpful. Yeah, I mean, I think about this too because like I climb and I definitely, depending on how much I'm climbing, have a different fear of falling, especially when I'm like leading outside. And sometimes I feel that fear like really strongly, and that's when I mean I like the idea of like, okay, when I'm feeling this really strongly, then maybe today is not the day that I'm leading outside because I'm too scared to be doing this right now. um but and then also having that like threshold of fear, which is like within reason. And I'm not like an elite climber or anything, but I just mean like as far as like just enjoying being outside and like pushing yourself. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think too, something with that is like it does vary day to day, and it also, your threshold for how much fear you're able to tolerate does also shift, within the season. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
coming from, the off season and you're starting to do your sport, it's pretty common for athletes to be experiencing either a lower threshold of fear or just more fear in general. And some of that too is just about, like the exposure over time. It has different names. There's some people call it pressure training, other performance coaches call it stress inoculation training. So it's sort of being willing to put yourself in a situation where you're feeling deliberately uncomfortable, still below threshold, but maybe kind of a little bit towards, the upper limit of your tolerance for fear and risk, and being like, all right, so I'm going to be here in this uncomfortable place. I'm going to use skills and tools to navigate the situation that I'm in. I'm going to recover really well afterwards. And then I'm going to trust that my threshold is going to increase over time. I guess a good analogy would be, how when you go to the gym and lift weights, you stress your muscle, and then over time, all of those little micro tears make you stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you are personal as you've like learned this type of training, are you have you noticed like I know you had that initial interaction with your sports mental coach, but like did you after that, after learning all of this, has that kind of helped you improve your feeling around your perfectionism?
Yeah, Yeah, I think, yeah, so I think I'm a lot more aware of my perfectionism. I'm a lot more aware of when I have an expectation for myself that might not actually be realistic. And I think I have a pretty pretty big toolbox for navigating a lot of a lot of situations around, sports and performance. So I think for myself, some things that have been really helpful for managing my own perfectionism, I spent a lot of time thinking about things that I did well. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I've learned. I think sometimes having a mistake or a crash can be in the moment pretty emotionally uncomfortable. And a lot of times mistakes or crashes are really big opportunities to discover a weakness, in your technique or the mental aspect of your sport. And so I think starting to really view mistakes or crashes as opportunities for growth has been pretty big, and trying to approach those opportunities for growth with a lot of compassion for myself as a performer, and trying to be pretty open to sometimes learning some uncomfortable truths about where my skills are at, which is
Yeah.
not all, it's not fun to be in that place of like, oh, like I thought I had this skill and now I'm finding out that I don't. Yeah, I think like just really starting to lean into addressing my weaknesses, and being more comfortable with being like, oh, I have areas for growth, as an athlete.
Yeah. I mean, it's also being like willing to like look at yourself without any sort of lens. Just this is where I am right now and not have some sort of feeling about it. That's like a really hard thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of times what I will tell athletes is that mistakes are value neutral information, right? That's a mistake is just telling
Yeah.
you where your technical skills are at, or
Mhm.
where your performance was at on that particular day. And then what starts to get tricky is the meaning that we start to ascribe to our mistakes, right? The story we tell ourselves about our mistakes, like, oh, I'll never get there, I'll always be that. And I think
Mhm.
that can start to get really tricky. But yeah, I mean, a mistake is just information about, where your skills were at on a particular day or in a particular context.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a much more constructive thought than the all the other negative thoughts that come along with that happens. I don't want to give anybody fuel for how they feel about themselves, so I won't say what the things I think about are. But like I I know I've been in like really bad places just from like a race performance not like the outcome it did not go well or how I had wanted it to, and whether or not it was spurred on by like mental beliefs that I had or not. The fitness wasn't there at that time. It's still like at the end of the day feels just as terrible. So it's good to like be able to like learn, be open and like learn from those events, because sometimes like if you're thinking that you're gonna not do well, it's hard to like you kind of have this fear about trying to compete again, which is like a terrible cycle. So I guess like for you, that's awesome that you like have like so many, like you said, like so many more tools in your toolbox to be able to still like find joy in what you love to do. Um, I have a random question for you. So my partner is also a climber, and he can just like sometimes turn his brain off, like in a very scary situation, can just like turn the fear off where I feel like I can't do that. Is there any sort of reason he can do that, or do you know anybody who's like that? Um, I always like am so in awe of it because I just get scared and then I'm useless.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My my suspicion is that he's able to use the fear to increase his focus. And I think everybody's level of self-awareness and everybody's inclination to share how they're feeling in scary situations is a little bit different.
Hmm.
Um, I think in kayaking in particular, there's people are pretty open about being afraid. Like it's not, you don't really get shamed for being like, oh yeah, like I'm feeling scared. Everybody's like, yeah, of course it's scary. But I think in other sports, that's definitely pretty different. Like it's less common for people to be open about feeling scared, say in like skiing. So my suspicion is that he is still feeling afraid, but he's using that to increase his focus. And it sounds like for you that might not be the case, or your natural inclination in
Hmm.
situations like that might be to share how you're feeling. And then if you're saying I'm scared and he's like, well, I'm just trying to get this done, like that's a little bit of just like a mismatch of maybe like processing or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think I would, yeah, I mean, I would just be, I would be curious to know more. It's
Yeah. I know. It's just yeah, I don't know what it is either because like there's just like certain situations where he's able to do that. But yeah, you'd have to I guess probably talk to him. I don't know what's going on in his brain. I just feel like that's a really good point though because like I feel like I only lately in climbing I've been more open about being like I'm scared I'm not going to do this right now. Like giving myself permission to be like no, I don't want to, instead of being like oh, just suck it up and you can just, you'll do it. It's fine. I've like given myself permission to be like, okay, I'm getting too afraid. Like I'm feeling your palms are starting to sweat. You're having responses to fear, having unrealistic thoughts like instead of falling like gravity doesn't make sense anymore kind of thing like where you'd fall straight down instead of out like my brain starts thinking about all the things that could possibly happen. So yeah, I think it's just like that's a good assessment though of like the mix match of uh would you say process?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way you guys are processing that.
Yeah. Cuz it's like he doesn't understand where I'm coming from. I don't understand. I can't fathom why he's not feeling afraid in certain situations.
Yeah. Another interesting thing too about fear and anxiety is
Mhm.
people can interpret the way that they're feeling in a situation very differently. So like, if for you, you notice your hands are sweating and the story that's happening in your mind is like, oh, my palms are sweating. That means that I'm really anxious or I'm really afraid. There could be a different athlete who their palms start sweating and they think, oh, okay, cool. This means I'm ready to go. And so it could
Mhm.
also be the case for your boyfriend that he's just having this or your partner that he's
Yeah.
having this interpretation of what's happening in his body as being like readiness, prepared, ready for action, like, oh, I have a lot of adrenaline, that means that I'm ready to do this hard, scary thing, versus like for your experience, you might find those things a little bit more aversive. And in the case where a physical symptom of anxiety feels aversive and feels distracting, it can, really interfere with performance. And so in a situation like that, it would be, like some techniques to start reevaluating some of those symptoms as just being not necessarily connected to a particular outcome. Like I think a lot of times athletes tend to think I have to feel good in order to perform well. And feeling good doesn't cause a good performance. Feeling bad doesn't cause a good performance. It's more about where you're putting your focus, right? So you can be
Mhm.
feeling absolutely terrible and still be able to lock in and perform well.
Yeah. I'm gonna like sit with that one for a while. That's Yeah, that's so true. Because I think about that take it back to running because I ran like that's what I competed in. But like you'd always assess like on your warm up, you'd always assess, and you're like, oh, this feels really hard. This is gonna be a hard race today. It's gonna feel terrible. Blah 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 blah. So that like idea that like it doesn't matter like what that like that's not going to impact anything like that takes a bunch of weight off like just knowing that that's not the thing that's going to determine the outcome. Yeah, that was huge. Thank you for that one. uh
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And then the other thing too is that like having I have a lot of like negative thoughts in my head when I am getting scared, probably tied to like not wanting to be afraid. So all those things that you say in your head about yourself, and then I'm not like you said like when your hands start sweating, like that could be like an opportunity to be like, okay, I'm ready, as opposed to I'm ready to come down. Like I just like the opportunity to be able to switch it, like change it. It could mean either thing. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that you're done for the day or I was like prescribing myself all of these things that didn't actually matter in that situation or didn't actually mean anything. I just decided that they were all negative and I wasn't going to do good. And so, yeah, cool. I'm excited to try some stuff now.
Yeah.
Now I have
Yeah.
to
So,
go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, so a lot of the positive appraisal of anxiety stuff, they've done a lot of research on athletes, and they did one on D1 college gymnasts, and they found that the gymnasts that interpreted all of their pre-competition physical symptoms of like sweating, nausea, like dread, shallow breathing, rapid heartbeat, all of those symptoms, the ones that interpreted those as meaning that they were ready to compete, they
Mhm.
had, excuse me, routines with higher levels of competitive difficulty. They were more confident. They had more self-efficacy, and their competitive scores were higher. So there's like definitely some juice to that idea of like, oh, like does do my sweaty palms mean that I'm ready to do the hard thing?
Yeah.
Like that can definitely create some really positive performance benefits for sure.
Yes, definitely. Um, yeah, man, I wish I could race an 800 and have that like mindset again. Just so worried about the outcome at the time and not necessarily like or just had so much ideas about what everything meant that would assign an outcome at the time would be a better way to say it. Yeah. This is super helpful. I hope other people are getting a lot from this too. This is very interesting. So I wonder too, I'm like, what else haven't I been thinking about in the ways that would help performance? Just these ideas. Like I guess I'm almost 40. So like when I was first starting out, this like there was like the mental aspect of thinking about thinking about the race. Like why am I not thinking of words today? The you're when you just like envision it in your head, and that was like a really popular thing, but there wasn't that much about like the sports psychology really at the time. I think all teams should have sports psychologists. I think it's like super helpful to have this kind of access to your brain.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think most athletes are sort of broadly familiar with visualization, and I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
That's what I was looking for.
yeah. And I think too, another thing that's interesting is a lot of times athletes have mental strategies and tools that they've sort of figured out work for them on their own. And so a cool thing that mental training can do that I really like is taking something that the athlete is a tool that the athlete has sort of naturally arrived at, and then doing some little tweaks that have been, shown by science to be really effective to make whatever mental tool the athlete has landed on work even better. So visualization, I think, is a good example of something where there are a couple little tweaks that can take what's already working for the athlete and kind of turn it up to 11. So like with visualization, it's all about making it as functionally equivalent as possible. So a lot of times people think about visualization as like laying down in the dark with your eyes closed,
Mhm.
which is not, that's like functionally equivalent to sleep, right? Like that's not what performing
Yes.
feels like or looks like or
Yeah.
anything. So, starting to think about like, oh, if I ski racers do this all the time, if I do my visualization, like wearing my sports equipment, it's going to be more effective. If I do
Mhm.
it in the sports environment, right? Like at the race course, then it's going to be more effective. If I'm creating the emotions that I experience before and during my performance and visualizing myself succeeding while having those emotions, even if they're emotions that I experience as being unpleasant, then that's going to, improve your visualization practice as well.
Yeah. So like actually trying to feel the race, like I'm gonna call everything a race, race day emotions while visualizing the race in potentially your race kit of some sort.
Yeah. And potentially at the track or the arena or wherever where you're going to
Yeah.
be competing as well. Yeah. And like you can also troubleshoot a lot with visualization. An athlete could imagine, oh, what if I do my warm up and I feel terrible, and then
Mhm.
visualize still having a good performance in spite of feeling, terrible in the warm up too.
Yeah. That would have been super helpful. Yeah, I think that's like a huge. I always, when you were saying that, you know what came in my head was they tell you to like when you're studying for something, it helps you to remember if you're in like the same seat that you're going to take the test in or whatever. That's what it reminded me of when you were telling me that, which I guess is probably like the same logic applied to both situations.
Yeah. I don't actually know anything about the science of studying for tests beyond just having taken a lot of them in my academic
Yeah.
career, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was something similar going on.
Yeah. I'm also a reformed a bit perfectionist. I have anxiety and like I stress about things. So when I was running competitively, it was just a very like when I would not do well, it was terrible and I would be so upset for days after the race and it felt like just I would just torment myself about how, bad the race was and it was because of all these things. And I wasn't trying hard enough or I didn't push myself hard enough and like again, like maybe the fitness wasn't there, but like my senior year I didn't do as well as I did like my junior year. So it was like a really rough year for me. And so I really, beat myself up and really got tired of racing at that point. By the time I was done with that season, I was just like, it doesn't matter anymore. And I just like ran myself into the ground after that just because I was so upset with like the season in general. Is there anything like for that situation, like when you're not performing well and you think you're not going to do well and then you don't do well? Is there any way to like, I guess, get out of that cycle?
Yeah. So I mean it to me it sounds like there were some expectations that were not helping. So maybe an expectation of like my performance should continue to improve year after year after year. And it can be really tough because performance doesn't necessarily happen on a linear line, right? Like a nice straight upward one. A lot of times there are like curves and dips. And if you're an athlete or performer that tends to have really high expectations for themselves, being in a dip or a trough can feel like, the sky is falling.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really easy to sort of uh I don't know, not see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And so I think, sometimes like life circumstances change and that can make performance harder to, like starting a new job or like, having a kid, more family responsibilities at home, big senior projects, all of that. So yeah, I'm thinking about, like things outside of sport that could be maybe causing a difference in that athlete's performance. And then I also think that self-compassion can be very difficult to practice, but very important in situations like that. And I think there's sometimes a perception that to continue to improve, that this sort of like beating yourself up needs to continue to happen, right? Of like, oh, I didn't perform well, so I like am gonna feel really terrible about it because that is going to cause me to perform better next time. And there's not really like, there's not really a through line that works like that. And I, it can sometimes create a cycle of just wanting to avoid the situation that's causing those negative emotions, which doesn't help, the athlete continue to grow or progress. So I think, yeah, self-compassion, particularly with there's a whole process called a reset that an athlete can do after they make a mistake or have a disappointing performance. And that's really rooted in developing, self-compassion. And they've done studies in athletes that have moved from like a lot of shame and negative emotions about bad performances towards self-compassion tend to do a lot better because then it's more focused on, what can I learn from this situation? What like is it the case that you're going to PR every race realistically? Like probably not, so kind of like reminding yourself of that and then, you know, building in a practice of being kind to yourself after a performance that didn't go your way can be really helpful to sustain motivation over time.
Yeah, and just like not get burnt out by it. That's really interesting. And then the other thing I was going to ask is with, I guess this is kind of goes along with perfectionism a little bit, but like thinking about things in absolutes. If like I have to do X, Y, or Z, like workout to completion for it to be like a successful thing, I struggle a lot with this. Like I can't like I've gone to like let me see if I can explain this well. I've like I for instance have to run okay, if I had a 50-minute run on my workout, I'm doing 50 minutes. I'll probably do a little bit more than 50 minutes. I'm really exposing myself here right now. I have to do a little bit more than 50 minutes because what if I like didn't stop my watch properly or something like that? So I have like a really hard time with saying like, oh, okay, I will just run exactly 50 minutes and be fine with that without having to worry about all of the other extraneous possibilities that could because if I don't get that like 50-minute run, then I didn't do even if I ran like 49.51 that wasn't I didn't do that what I was supposed to do and I should feel shame around that. What would you say to an athlete like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So it sounds like the situation is that there's some anxiety around if I don't do my workout exactly as written, then I'm bad in some way, like bad athlete, bad performer,
Yeah.
not gonna achieve my goals, like there's gonna be some negative consequence down the line that I don't want. And so then it sounds like to manage those to manage those feelings.
This is a very common thing for runners in general. So it's not getting 5 miles or getting like I have to run a 50 minutes and that's exactly what I need to do. It's very common. So I guess this could help other people, not just specific to myself. But
Sure.
I
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so the needing to do more. So my first if I were to work with an athlete where this is what was going on, my first instinct would be to start to challenge some of those beliefs about the like what would go wrong if I didn't run 51 minutes or whatever because and I think yeah, I mean, I think my initial thought would be a mindset shift around the potential consequences of not doing exactly enough. And then my other question would be, what does your body think about always running more? And, is the always running more creating some other sorts of consequences down the line that are, like what's the trade-off that's happening here? And then I also think too about this idea of values guided action. So kind of checking in with what you value as a person and seeing if that shifts the decision making or shifts some of the negative emotions around the idea of like I always need to do more to make sure that I've done enough. So like a good example of the way that values guided action can work is if an athlete really values resilience, then values guided action might look like the athlete saying yes to something that's hard and difficult and scary because they're acting in alignment with their value, right? So the short-term consequence of that is that all of the unpleasant mind states are going to be there with the uncomfortable thing, right? The anxiety, the self-doubt, the negative thoughts. But the long-term consequence is that you're doing a behavior that aligns with your core value as a human being, and that's
Mhm.
going to, over time, move you closer to your goals. It's going to, help you get where you want to go as an athlete and as a human being. So my instinct is that yeah, like a mindset shift and then checking in with some values and some values guided action and starting to think about, what is what would it be like to be a little bit uncomfortable emotionally in the short term to have the long-term benefit of moving closer to who I want to be as a person.
Yeah. Yeah. That that definitely makes sense because like I'm actively working on being more okay with trying to just enjoy being active instead of having like I know I'm not going to be a certain fitness level forever. I'm definitely not it right now. But I think that I'm personally working, not anybody else, but me personally, I am working on really just enjoying being active and not placing all of those other things on top of it. So my long-term value is to be able to just enjoy being active. And so that would align with thinking about it that way for myself, that would align with what I would want to do long term. I think for other runners who have the similar thing, um, just thinking about things like longevity of enjoyment. Every time you're thinking about the time issue, that there's a lot of emotion, like you were saying, that goes along with that, which is a lot of energy as well. So like long term, you're wasting a lot of energy worrying about running a couple extra minutes and it's zapping joy from your life or from the activity is another way to think about it. So I think it's like I said, it's like a very, very common thing. I know like so many runners who do it or have done it that I've run with want to run like a round number or want to run 5 mile or like the exact mileage or will only stop at a mile or a mile and a half, like that it's just super common. So hopefully that will that will help some people because it's helped me and I can identify myself and how I long term want to approach it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And yeah, I don't know. I'm right now I'm just thinking about like my relationship to running, which is like
Yeah.
very casual.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted is there sorry to give you the pop quiz. I this has been so interesting for me and so I really appreciate you taking the time to consider those things. We always like to end our episodes with this question, which is what words of empowerment would you give that might be starting something new or want to continue? Like what words of empowerment would you give them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot about life as shoveling dirt, right? And so every day you're just trying to shovel the dirt of life. And some days you might only have a teaspoon, so you can only move a little bit of dirt. And some days you might have a snow shovel and you can show up and move quite a bit of dirt. But I think it's important to be kind to yourself when you're having a teaspoon day, right? And like as long as you're shoveling dirt, you're still making progress. And eventually, a teaspoon a day is still going to move the dirt pile, which is what really matters.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely a lot to think about from this episode. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to add?
I don't really think so. Yeah, I feel like we covered quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe learned a little bit too much about me that you had not intended. Um, no, this has been really great. So if people want to hire you, work with you, follow your journey, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at mindfullsend underscore MPC. Mindful has two L's. So you can follow me on Instagram. And then I also have a website, which is the same mindfullsend.mindful has two L's. Yeah, I mean, I'm always excited to, work with new clients in different sports. I talked a lot about the extreme sport context on this podcast, but I work with mainstream sport athletes too. And I think one of my favorite parts about my work as a mental performance coach is just getting to know new athletes in new performance contexts. And I think for me, it's cool when I get to work with an athlete that does a sport that I've, like never even heard of or never really even thought about. And I really like taking that opportunity to get to learn more about a different sport context. So I'm always interested to know, about people from different backgrounds and different sport experiences. And I don't know, I feel very grateful to have had this opportunity to be on this podcast and talk about my cool job that I like
Hmm.
doing so much. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome. Great. You can follow me personally. That's at Jacalyn Gross, JACALYNGROSS. You can follow Women in Power Active at Women in Power Active. And if you are listening to this and you want to watch the video version, you can go to Women in Power Active on YouTube and please subscribe. It really does help. Both the audio and video version of this podcast was produced by Jeremy Canaria and edited by me. Lynn, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It has been so eye-opening. I've learned so much. You've like really helped me. I just like am stunned. Like I just need to like think about all of the lessons that I've learned today and like and how they will affect me long into the future. So thank you so much for being here today.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a very nice time.
Good. I'm glad.